Well, happy, beautiful, amazing day. Dr. Bob Rakowski here, and I've got to say this to date will be the crown jewel of my podcast recording. I've done, I think, 50 plus, and somehow, some way, maybe through prayer, and Chris is a man of faith, God delivered Chris Widener here. He is a speaker Hall of Famer. He is Motivational Speaker Hall of Fame, New York Times best-selling author, 26 books. He's got one that hasn't even been written yet, but Hollywood is already after him. And by the way, with Chris, it's not Holly Weird. It would be Hollywood. It would be nothing that had all this garbage in designed to hijack brains. He's a man of faith. He's coming up with revival250.com, where I believe that we're of the mindset. In fact, I know he is, and I am too, that we're not going to beat this alone. We're in such a crisis that we need the fruits of the Spirit, which is his most recent book, his 26, Praying Through the Fruits of the Spirit. So, Chris, how do you want to start? Why is it important? Well, let's go with your backstory. Tell me your origin story all the way through to where we are now.
Well, I was born into a pretty affluent family in 1966. In 1969, my dad made $90,000. He was the fifth partner at what is now one of the largest architecture firms in the world. He was their chief financial officer, an architecture firm called NBBJ. And all of the architects out there right now go, oh, wow, NBBJ, because they've got offices all over the world, 10,000 architects, the whole thing. And but in 1970, when I was 4 years old, he got cancer and died within 6 months. And the one mistake he made was he had barely any life insurance. I think he had $30,000 worth of life insurance. At that stage, he should have had $4 million worth of life insurance. He was 41. And that began a downward spiral for my mom and me. We had to sell a house that recently sold for $3.8 million because she couldn't afford the $400 a month mortgage payment. So my mom got into real estate. She started flipping real estate, which is why we ended up 28 homes in 11 different schools. I don't know why she didn't flip real estate in the same school district, but we moved all over Seattle. I've lived all over Seattle and got involved in drugs very early, 6th grade, drugs and alcohol. I made most of my money starting in the 6th grade through high school, betting the ponies at Long Acres Horse Track, which isn't even still there. One big saving grace in my upbringing, and it's a great part of my story, is that I was a ball boy for the Seattle Supersonics from the time I was 11 until I was 18. So I worked with the team for 7 years, including 1979 when we won our only world championship against the Washington Bullets. And of course, now the Sonics are the Oklahoma City Thunder. They moved to Oklahoma City. So I got to experience some really great things. I became a Christian the summer before my senior year, ended up going to Bible college, got a degree in youth and family ministry, and I spent 11 years in pastoral ministry, 3 as a youth minister, and then 11 as a church planter, which means I would go and start churches rather than go into an existing church. And in 2002, I felt like I was supposed to go and write and speak full time. So I resigned from my church. And from 2002 to 2009, I spent 7 years working with Jim Rohn. I wrote his last book called 12 Pillars. And then I worked 2 years, 2002, 2004, ghostwriting for John Maxwell. I wrote his nationally syndicated column. And then I spent 2 years co-hosting Zig Ziglar's television show called True Performance, which you can still find on YouTube. And sometimes people say, how long ago did you do that TV show with Zig? And I say, about 30 pounds ago. That's about right, about 30 pounds ago. So, but it was like 2005-ish, 2007, somewhere in there.
So now, where are you today? What are you most excited about?
Well, I've spent my last 23 years full-time public speaking, 2,500 speeches all over the world, and I've gotten some great accolades from that. But about a year and a half ago, I wanted to write a book on revival. So I wrote a book on revival called The Coming American Revival. And with everything going on now, I look like a genius. So, because it came out in October. So when I worked with John Maxwell, they used to do a thing called Maximum Impact, and they'd put 3,000 people in Atlanta, and then they would satellite it to churches all around the country. So we're doing a revival meeting. Next year is the 250th anniversary, so we're calling it Revival 250, and they can find it, as you mentioned, at revival250.com. And we're going to host 14,200 people at the ViStar Arena in Jacksonville, Florida. And then we're going to live stream through the pray.com app. There are our partners on this, and they have 26 million downloads. And then we're going to live stream to homes, churches, colleges, prisons, and military bases around the world. And we'll also have an international feed as well. So my goal, I have 2 prayer goals. The first prayer goal is that we reach 10 million. And the second prayer goal is that the first prayer goal is too small. So we think it has some real great opportunity. We're going to bring in the best speakers, best musicians in the Christian community. And there's 2 things that I always tell our steering committee and people that hear me talk about it. I have 2 rules that are going to govern this revival. Number 1, it's going to look like heaven. It isn't an old white guys conference. We want Black preachers and Latino preachers and Asian preachers. And, we want everybody to be represented, because that's what heaven's going to look like. In fact, I always joke, I say, if there isn't a Black gospel choir, I may not even show up. Because I love Black gospel choirs. I'm just so good. And the second thing I tell people is it's going to be everybody from the Presbyterians to the Pentecostals. And we can all put aside our little differences for the day and focus on the main thing and make the main thing the main thing. So we're very excited about it. I got great people helping, great people on the team.
Chris, I want to build a little bridge. So what about non-Christians? Are they welcome?
Oh,
what
sure.
Would be their draw?
What
would be their draw?
Probably if their neighbor invited them. I mean, I don't know. Okay. So there's 2 things, and this is interesting. I always have to tell people there's a difference between an evangelistic crusade and a revival meeting. An evangelistic crusade is where people bring somebody, like Billy Graham is the classic example, or now Greg Laurie. A Christian brings a non-Christian friend, and they hear the gospel presented in hopes that they will, receive Christ. A revival meeting, it means revival literally means life again, is what it means. So coming to life again. So I tell people this is more like a family meeting. This is about the state of America. And, I've been very involved in politics over the course of my career, speech coaching, everybody from people running for president down to city council. I ran myself for the U.S. Senate in 2010 in Washington State. But politics, our political problem is not our problem. Our spiritual problem is our problem. The reason we have a political problem is because of our spiritual problem. And people always try to say, well, it's the liberals, or no, it's the conservatives, or it's the whoever, that it's their fault. No, I believe that we are in America where we are today because of the church. And because the church is anemic and powerless and carnal. And I always say if you take the average Christian, if you take Sunday morning and Wednesday night out, they look just like everybody else. They spend their money the same way, they consume the same media, and there's no set apartness to the church today. And so this is a call to the church. Get your act together. Right? There's a world around us that is lost and hurting and broken, and we're just sitting there with all the answers, but we don't do anything to help anybody. And so that's really the meaning and the point behind the revival meeting.
And by the way, we've got good data behind that. I want to share a funny story. I remember someone was being invited to church, and by a high level pastor, and he says, "No, I don't want to be around all the hypocrites." And he said, "Come on, we always have room for one more."
One more.
So there's not a person out there that can't improve their walk, but I don't follow politics maybe as closely as a highly responsible citizen should. I'm more, let's make the world healthier. Let's love one another. Let's always share good stuff. Politics, I've probably been politically incorrect and censored since 2020 horrifically. And by the way, I want to plant a seed. If you need someone to talk about health and how God designed us all to have this abundant life by enjoying the fruit of the Spirit and living them, I'd love to be at that conference sharing over 10,000 hours of seminars. But I digress on that. But somewhere in Central America, they have a leader that took over one of the worst countries, or maybe it's South America. They were being run over by gangs, and he solved it, in a year. He says, our problem was spiritual, not political.
Yes, it's El Salvador, and a great young leader. I don't even think he's 45 years old, but he has turned what used to be a real hellhole and riddled with crime, and has really turned that place around.
Well, maybe we don't want to get too political on that, but Charlie Kirk was, to a very high degree, trying to do that. And there's plenty of high-ranking people that said, that guy's going to be president within a decade. You know what? I don't think anybody agrees with everything that everybody says, but he stood on principles.
Yeah.
And so any comment on that? I mean, it's such a.
Yeah, I knew Charlie. Charlie and I don't say that we're friends, but we were friendly. We talked on the phone a few times, and, first time I ever met him was down in Florida. And so the thing that I think is really disturbing today in America is the lack of free speech. It's like, if you don't agree with me, you're evil and horrible, and I need to stop you at any cost, including murdering you. And, this is my view on why we are where we are now. 100 years ago, there were still two parties, but they all came from the same worldview, the traditional Judeo-Christian worldview. In the 1960s, there was a very purposeful shift trying to go against God, free sex, free drugs, Timothy Leary, those things, and anti-God. I think Time Magazine even had one that said God is dead, and so over the last 65 years from 1960, we now, instead of being 100% Judeo-Christian worldview, we now have about 40% secular humanist, God is dead, free sex, free drugs, do whatever you want, and then we have the traditional worldview. But even a lot of people in the traditional worldview don't necessarily live it. And so, so there's always been different worldviews, different countries, different, people have different worldviews, totally fine. And that's part of what makes us smart, right? We need to hear all the worldviews and then come to our own conclusions. The problem now in America is that it used to be that the Democrats and the Republicans wouldn't argue about what to do, but they'd argue about how to do it. Now, because we kind of wanted the same destination, right? But they wanted to go this way, the other wanted to go this way. But now you have two different destinations, and they view it with a moral imperative. When you put a moral imperative on your political position, or any position for that matter, it doesn't create, I think my way will work and I don't think your way will work. It creates, I'm good and you're evil. That's what the moral imperative of your worldview does, is it says, I'm good and you're evil. And then the more, and again, I don't want to get into politics too much, but when you call somebody Hitler or something like that long enough, remember in high school when we would take these classes, and they'd give us these moral dilemmas, like the lifeboat one, right? You only have 6 seats, and you got the president, you got an old lady, and you got a pastor, and which one are you going to leave off, right? Well, another one that we were asked in those classes was, if you could go back in time, would you kill Hitler before the war, right? Because that's sort of the moral imperative, right? Is if somebody's evil and is going to kill millions and millions and millions of people, it justifies warring against them, even up to the epitome of death, right? So that's the thing that terrifies me the most for us as Americans right now, is that this moral imperative that the worldviews have given themselves, it basically says the end justifies the means. And that's where you get yourself into real trouble.
Well, I don't know what, if we're getting off of too big a tangent or hole, or maybe this is the purpose of this conversation, but I was listening to a historian, and he said that, there are some evil people out there, and he had pretty good evidence behind it, that he figured out the best way to break up these strong institutions was from within. Yep. So he said they put these horrible people in the churches, and committed these heinous crimes, and it was an inside job. And
there was a book written in 1999 by Robert Bork, and he's passed away now, but you probably remember Robert Bork was nominated for the Supreme Court, and they borked him. It became a verb. They went against him so bad, he finally just said, I'm not doing this. But he was nominated. 1999 would have been, well, he wrote the book in 99. I can't remember when he was nominated. I think maybe by George Bush Sr. But so anyway, he wrote a book called Slouching Towards Gomorrah. And the whole book is about that decision to try to take over the institutions of America. If we can take over the institutions of America, we can take over culture, we can take over worldview, we can take over money, we can take over control. And the whole book, and that was written in 1999, let alone now.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And then you must have known that they were infiltrating the universities. We start looking at that. And by the way, I'm such a fan of higher education, but let's get an education, not a propaganda.
Yeah, exactly.
Jordan Peterson, he was asked, is university worth it today? He says, well, maybe for science, technology, engineering, medicine, He says, but besides that, you spend $250,000 to come out a brainwashed idiot that can't think for themselves.
Well, and what's interesting is because of the shift towards white collar jobs, it's actually been good for blue collar jobs. So, when I was doing drive time radio in Seattle with a partner, we used to talk about all these jobs that you could go and get and make 60, 70, $80 an hour, as a welder. Some welders are making 100 plus. You don't need to go to high school. You do, you can either do an apprenticeship or you could do a 2-year, certification, something like that. And then, of course, so that's just trading time for money, right? I'm going to be a welder. I'm going to make $100 an hour. Or you can still be an entrepreneur and say, I'm going to open up a welding company and I'm going to hire 10 welders. So you can still, when I lived in northern New Jersey, one of the richest people, I was a youth minister, and one of the girls in my youth group, her dad was a plumber. She always used to say, my dad's a plumber. Well, one day after youth group or whatever, we were giving all the kids rides home, and I dropped her off at like this 16,000 square foot mansion. And I said, I thought you said your dad was a plumber. He owns a plumbing company. And I go, oh, like how many plumbers? And she goes, I don't know, 300 or something like that. So you can still, it's been one of the benefits of people moving away from the trades is now they have to raise more money in order to get people to go back into the trades. And it actually is beneficial, I think, for those who don't want to go to college and don't want to sit in an office all day long.
Well, Mike Rowe used to host Dirty Jobs, and he's got a podcast, and I listened to one this weekend. He was talking about different inconvenient facts, like things that have been suppressed by our government, like the risks of vaccines, and just going on and on about
proudly unvaccinated here. Not the ones you get when you're a kid, but
well, you and I go back to almost the same time. I had 4 as a kid.
Yeah.
But, I've got 3 kids and no, we didn't take that route. I've got 6 granddaughters and no, none of them took that route. And I'll tell you what, you look at them compared to the other kids and you can see that there's 3 generations of better choices.
Well, did you see the study that just came out within the last 2 or 3 weeks? It was a long-term study, I think done by Harvard. I want to say 80 years, but I think it was like 8,000 people. And they tracked and they had a small group, like 1,000 totally unvaccinated, never anything, not even the mumps or measles. And then everybody that just got kind of the, whatever they dictate, now it's like 70 shots for kids or something like that.
76 by age 6.
Yes. Yeah. 76. And when I was raising my children, my oldest is 35. I think it was like 7 or 8. And so, but they said clearly, unequivocally, the people who are unvaccinated live longer. And it really just rocked everybody's world because it was done by Harvard. And it was 8,000 people over the course of a full lifetime.
Well, Chris, if you seek, you will find. So, now I'm a chiropractor, so I'm more naturally minded. And thank God I was a chiropractor before I had children, but we go through school and they said, here's the data on vaccines. And back then they injected mercury. And by the way, I just found out recently that they still had that many of the shots, even though they knew how horrible it was. Yeah. And they said, you know what? God gave us an immune system. We wouldn't be here if it didn't work. Why don't we just make better choices? And that's the choice that I made for my family. And I'm thrilled that I did.
Well, natural immunity and the COVID thing, natural immunity. It's right. We've lived with natural immunity forever, and we understand it. There were some families back in the 1800s when one of the kids got chicken pox, they put all the other kids in bed with them for a couple days so that they'd all get chicken pox. So then we're done with chicken pox because of natural immunity.
Yeah,
right?
Chris, we had the chicken pox party at my house with my kids, and anything that I could expose my kids to, because they were healthy and well-nourished in a low-stress environment. I had a kid come in with German measles, in my practice, and I brought him home to play with my kids.
Well, here's a funny story. People use this hand sanitizer all the time, and they don't realize that you're supposed to touch your face. There's all sorts of bacteria in our body, but they're good bacteria. When you eliminate any bacteria, you actually make yourself less healthy and more susceptible to these kinds of things. And so, we get this kind of idea and we run with it without actually thinking about the unintended consequences.
One of my great mentors said when COVID came about, he says, at the end of this, we're going to call it Saint COVID, because guess what? People are going to wake up. And I like what Joe Rogan said. He says, you know what? We lost a lot of good people during COVID. He says, and many of them are still alive. And so, it's sad but true. But I see,
Yeah.
revival250.com bringing people back. So do you want to get into the fruits of the spirit, or that can be a fun discussion, or you were talking about a book plan for your future that I thought was brilliant. And we may not want to talk about it because, like you said, someone will take that idea and run
Yeah,
with
I'm in the process of getting the screenplay written, so maybe not, but
we'll not talk about that.
We'll come back on when it's turned into a movie. We can talk about the fruit of the spirit. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to finish with love, though. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness,
I mean, if you think about it, what would happen if everybody lived out the fruit of the spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Like, what could go wrong with that if everybody embodied the fruit of the spirit? Now, here's what's interesting. In that passage, right before the fruit of the spirit, it says the acts of the sinful nature calls it the acts of the sinful nature. It's because it's what we do. Then he says, but the fruit of the spirit is. So you have acts of disobedience or acts of the sinful nature, and then you have the fruit of the spirit, which it sort of insinuates that this isn't something we do, it's something God does through us. When we have the spirit in us, it produces the fruit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, etc. And so when I look at somebody who says I'm a Christian, the first thing I look at is there fruit of the spirit there? Because if I said, "Oh, you like my apple tree?" and I looked at it and it had lemons on it, I'd say, "Bob, that's not an apple tree. That's a lemon tree," right? Because the fruit shows what it is. And so, I just think it's imperative for us as Christians to really think through, and I wrote the book Praying Through the Fruit of the Spirit, is, okay, God, I want to be more patient. I know that part of your nature is that you are a patient God, and you created us with the ability to be patient, and life always goes better when we're patient with our spouse and our children and our coworkers, etc. But I'm not very patient. I want everything now, and I want people to change right now. But how do I see you flow through me so that I can be a patient person, or a loving person, or a kind person? Or, I think at this stage of my life, I'm 59. I think probably the thing that I look for most in my friends and people I want to work with is kindness. Just being able to be kind, even if you disagree, to be kind. And at this stage of my life, I'm just really, really valuing kindness more than ever.
Somehow the name Aldous Huxley is in my mind because I'm a voracious reader, and someone, their final words on their deathbed, if you had advice, what would it be? Said, be kinder to one another.
Yeah.
And if it's not the right person, it's still a very good idea. So there's a lot of people lacking joy, going for quick fixes, probably things that absolutely violate what we should be doing because they can get a quick dopamine hit. So do you have a path to joy that maybe a non-believer can start to pursue?
Yeah, I think it's simple, and I think it would work for believers or non-believers, but especially for believers, it would work. And it's from Romans chapter 12. And it says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world. That's the first thing it says. Do not be conformed to the pattern of the world. So when you look at the pattern of the world, there's no love, there's no kindness, there's no joy, there's none of this. But he says, don't be conformed. And conform means with form. Con is a prefix which means with. And the way I always remember that is chili con carne. It's chili with beef. So conform means being with the form of the culture around you. So do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but rather be transformed. And trans is a prefix which means across. A transatlantic flight means you go from the US to Europe. Transcontinental railroad goes from New York to LA or wherever it goes. You're crossing over. So what God tells us is don't be like them. Instead, be like Jesus. And then he ends it by saying, do not be conformed to the pattern of the world, but rather be transformed. How? By the renewing of the mind. It's what we put into our mind. So, for example, Chris, how does that work? How do you change your mind and you're more joyful? Well, when you're looking at your state in life, right? Maybe you're sitting there and you're making $200,000 a year and you're going, well, I know this guy in my industry and he makes $1 million a year. And look at Jeff Bezos and look at Bill Gates. And boy, wouldn't it be nice to be Elon Musk? And, I always say you're looking up the food chain. You're thinking about what you don't have. You're developing envy and jealousy and things, and you're, oh, woe is me. I only make 200,000. I wish I was super rich like those guys. What I tell people, the best way to find the joy in your life, don't look up the food chain, look down the food chain. Look at the people, and I actually subscribe to and I give ministry money to every month to a group called Voice of the Martyrs, and they send out about a 12-page magazine, still a magazine to this day, and I get it every month, and I read it cover to cover, and it's usually 3 stories of Christian men or women around the world who suffer persecution. And I usually am crying by the end of that magazine, and I pray for the people. I mean, these are women whose husbands were murdered and then they were raped. These are pastors who they're in the middle of the church service. People show up and burn the church down. I mean, really, really bad things. And so when we look at that, we go, wow, God, thank you so much. I so appreciate what I have in my life right now. I'm so thankful for your provision, and that brings us to gratitude, which brings us to joy. But if you're saying, oh, I wish I could be like that guy, that brings you to envy, which brings you to discontent or, any sort of other kinds of things. So the way I try to remain joyful is, number one, don't sweat the small stuff, right? But number two, just understand that there's people who have more and there's people that have less. I try not to worry because God told me he'd provide for me, so I don't worry. In fact, when people say, do you ever worry? And I go, look at me. Have I missed a meal yet? I will start to worry when I'm hungry and there's no food in the fridge. That's when I'll start to worry. Other than that, everything takes care of itself. I'll do my hardest work. I'll do what I should, but I'm not going to worry about things anymore.
You start looking at these amazing principles, and I've seen John Maxwell, both from the pulpit and at different conferences, and what a sage of wisdom. But he talks about, lecturing in, for instance, Muslim countries or being in Dubai and, without giving the source, sharing these business principles that have been epic he's created probably the world's
Jim Rohn did that all the time. There was a difference. Yeah. Jim Rohn would kind of do it more under the radar. Zig would just quote the Bible and the Bible verse, but very different way. But both doing, Jim would say, "Ancient wisdom says," and what the ancient wisdom was the book of Proverbs or something like that.
One of the most impactful years, Zig Ziglar, 1992, challenged the whole audience: read the Bible cover to cover, see what it does for you. So 93, I did that. That's a life-changing year, So listen, if you haven't done it yet, it's most of us that know it is God's inspired word. But even if you don't know it, try to read it without being changed for the better.
And if you're intimidated, go online or go to your bookstore. It's called The Bible in 1 Year. It just breaks it down. So 365 readings and you'll be through the entire Bible. So you don't have to say, where do I start? What do I read? It's all completely
packaged. By the way, that's probably a better choice than I did, because when I was in Leviticus, I'm going, why am I doing this? But yeah, and there's a way to do it chronologically and everything else, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned envy. I want to quote Charlie Munger, even though he passed, Warren Buffett's business partner. He said, of the 7 deadly sins, envy is the only one that has absolutely no fun in it. So don't go there, but hey, we might as well avoid all 7 and go for the fruits. Yeah. My favorite fruit is love. I usually finish the conferences I teach with Jim Rohn's Questions to Ponder, and Og Mandino's The Greatest of These is Love. I will greet this day with love in my heart. What do you have to say about love, and how can people share more and get more?
I think people are confused about what love is, right? Somebody says, I love chocolate cake.
No, you don't.
No, you don't. Yeah. You really like and enjoy the chocolate cake, and you like to eat chocolate cake. Love is not a feeling. But most of us, we take romantic love and we think it's love. And even with people who are married for 60 years, they'll tell you at the beginning, you're butterflies and, all that kind of stuff. But then it transitions away from that romantic feeling love. And it comes down to, which I believe love is just treating people the way that you should treat somebody who's made in God's image, no matter how you feel about it. Right. That's why the Bible says, love your neighbor or love your enemies. Right. Well, how do you, it's easy to kind of, if you like your neighbor, it's easy to love your neighbor. It's easy to love your spouse or your children, right? How do you love somebody who is saying negative things about you? If you're thinking about love as a feeling, you go, well, I could never love my enemies. But if you think of love as being choosing to do the right thing and treat that person the way God would treat that person as a child of God and made in the image of God, now it transitions the way that you actually respond to that person. So instead of somebody tweets something bad and you get on Twitter and you say, well, no, he's really the really horrible, rotten one, and here's why. And now you're in this big brouhaha. But if you pick up the phone and go, hey man, I saw your tweet, or I heard somebody said you said this about me. Can we talk that through? Because it's not necessarily who I am. And I figured I'd just give you the respect of calling you up on the phone and talking about it. That's love. That's love. That's doing it the right way. You're loving that person by treating them with that respect and dignity that they deserve innately as a child of God.
Well, sometimes they refer to things as tough love.
Yeah,
I think love is love. Sometimes messages are tough, but love is love. And I want to, wrap up with Og Mandino. In his Greatest Salesman scroll about love, he says, and most of all, I will love myself. For when I do, I will zealously inspect all things that I allow to enter my mind, my heart, my soul, and my body. And if you're really doing that, you are going to get the fruits of the Spirit. So, Chris, we usually wrap up my podcast at about 30 minutes, and that's about where we are. I forgot, I was having so much fun. I never brought in our sponsor. So let me do that real quick. We're brought to you by bettercoffeeshop.com, the world's cleanest organic coffee and tea, reishi infused. I've invested in the company. I'm a huge proponent of it. Bettercoffeeshop.com. And Chris, what final words do you want as we wrap up this amazing conversation?
I'll end with a story. This is kind of the way I end almost all these, because a lot of podcasts say, final words, or what's your greatest lesson you ever learned? I was 23 years old and I went to a conference in Canada and didn't know anybody. And I'm, it's the second day or whatever. And I'm standing in the middle of the lobby during a break, drinking my coffee, don't know anybody. And I turn around to go somewhere and I come face to face with these two women. One was like 55, the other was like 30. And I come face to face. I just kind of turn around and bam, there they were. And I kind of look at them, you kind of move back like this. You can go around. And the younger woman, the 30-year-old, was looking at me like this. And I'm going, yeah. And the other one, I found out later, it was her mother, the older one. She looks at her, she looks at me, she looks at her, she looks at me, she looks at her and says, is that him? And I'm like, I'm just weirded out by this whole thing. And the girl still has not spoken a word. She goes, and the mom says, listen, last night, 2 a.m, we're up in our, got a room, 2 queen beds. My daughter wakes up in the middle of the night, wakes me up and says, Mom, I just had the most vivid dream. I saw this man's face and I'm supposed to give him a message from God. And she's telling me that. She turns and looks at her daughter, who's still like this. She hits her on the shoulder and says, so tell him. And she says, I'm supposed to tell you to be a voice, not an echo.
Wow.
And that's the last I ever heard from them. That was when I was 23-ish. So it's been 37 years that I have tried to make that my standard when I communicate, when I interact with people. I want to be a voice, not an echo. Now, here's the funny thing, Bob. I started going, I wonder if that was like a quote or something. So I look it up online and it's all attributed to Albert Einstein. That's what you do with quotes because I've been saying it for, years and years and years in my speeches on podcast. I've been on 1,000 podcasts where I've said, be a voice, not an echo. But Albert Einstein's getting all the credit. So I went to ChatGPT and I'm like, did Albert Einstein really say, be a voice, not an echo? And ChatGPT said, no, it doesn't sound like anything he would have said. There's no, evidence that he ever said it, blah, blah, blah. Everybody just kind of throws the wise stuff over to Albert Einstein. So I really believe that quote isn't even my quote or that woman's quote. It's God's quote. And that is, be a voice, not an echo. There's enough people that are conformed to the way everything's done. There's enough people just regurgitating what somebody else said. They're just sheep. They just follow along. God needs more people. Our world needs more people who are going to step out of that box, and they're going to be a voice, not an echo. And that's how I try to live my life. It's my life quote.
Well, I'm of the mindset that all good and all wisdom comes from one source, the same
Sure.
source.
Sure.
But with that said, I'm gonna actually throw a funny story on top of that. Zig Ziglar, you probably heard this one or remember it, but this man is in a assisted living elder center, and one day this woman comes up and she looks at him like this woman looked at you, and she goes, "Oh my God, you look exactly like my fourth husband." And he looks at her and says, "My God, how many times have you been married?" She says, "3."
I saw that one coming. 3.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful. Chris,
That's
I can't believe how quickly our time has passed.
Yeah, that's been great.
Revival250.com. Register. I don't know when the event will sell out.
Tickets will probably go on sale February-ish, but right now they can sign up for the email updates, and there's some check boxes if you're a pastor or you want to sponsor it or, whatever. But we don't spam. We send one email a week. It's usually like less than 3 paragraphs long. It's kind of about revival, and it just kind of keeps it in front of them that we're doing this. But yeah, they can sign up for the email updates. That'd be the best way to stay in touch.
That's often, I'm going to wrap up reiterating the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Imagine what your life would be if the majority of it was immersed in those fruits.
Yeah.
None of us are going to have all of it. That's not how this place was designed. But as Jim Rohn would say, hey, when you design the universe, you can make it however you want.
Right.
And I'll wrap up with as the ways I always do. I'm Dr. Bob Rakowski, absolutely knowing that we can all be happy, healthy, and successful. So long for now, and God bless.